Alright, so now I'm waiting for some parts to arrive. I'm going to start figuring out the choke and the throttle. So I already had popped the top of the air cleaner housing off, so I'm going to just take this guy apart so we can get some room in here to work. So we can hook everything up. Okay, looks like we got some Phillips screws. Kind of hold the top of this down. Then we got 10 millimeter there. Grab a wrench. Alright, so I ended up having to take this bolt completely out. These little screws didn't matter. And then over here on the side, there's two studs that hold the carburetor on, a couple nuts. I had to take those off, and then on the side over here, your choke and your fuel shutoff just need to be pointing straight out like that. And once you do that, then the whole thing just kind of slides right off, and you have the this is a PCV valve, it looks like, some sort of PCV valve. It's taking crank gas off of here, and then it looks like the little wire that was, or hose, that was on the original fuel tank is just to suck off some extra fumes and burn those. So I can just leave it coiled up in here or whatever for now, or trim it off since I'm not going to be using that anymore. And then the rest of the air filter housing comes off. And now we can see our carburetor. Yay, it just slides nice and easy. So we got our fuel on off, and then we have our choke that we need to, so their choke is on right there, choke's engaged, and then choke is disengaged. So what we gotta do is figure out a good way to mount up our linkage or whatever to this guy. So we'll start with that one. Alright, so on the choke, as you can see, it's one way or the other. But the little lever that it came with just comes right off, and they're just using a pin. Just a little metal pin there. Because it looks like it can't go all the way through because it'll rub on here. So might be able to use another cable and pull, and just pull it directly from here and not even use this thing at all anymore. It may be kind of hard to adapt this, although using this will give me a little bit more leverage for the pushing and pulling action. So it's one of those things I have to experiment and see what looks like it'll work good. Alright, so obviously got the motor sitting in place. Everything looks pretty good right now as far as mocking up. So now it's time to figure out how to get the linkage, like here's the old choke rod, and figure out how to adapt that over to work. And then the throttle one is easy because I'm just going to use a cable for that. So I'm going to take this housing back off so I can get to the choke stuff a little bit easier. So that's the same as the 3 bolts. I'll hold this on. I have an adapter coming for that, for the fuel line. Let's see. So here's the existing choke rod, as you can see here. So I gotta figure out how to make it either, I'm gonna clamp it where you pull the rod and it turns. It's a little hole to wiggle it, maybe like in the outer tip. But this rod's pretty big, so I don't know how well that's gonna work. So once I figure out how I'm gonna do it, I'll put that on camera. Alright, so with that out of the way, this comes right off. And get these, if I screw it up, you can get them cheap, like a GX 200, a Honda motor, they're a dime a dozen. But I'm just going to drill a little small hole in here. I have a choke, like a Dorman choke thing, cable for something. I'm just going to drill a little hole and put it through here and see if that'll work. Alright, so I got a little tiny hole drilled in it. And then I got my choke cable. So I found a couple, like a little old L bracket from something right here. What I'm going to do is mount it in here. Obviously I'm holding it backwards right now. But mount it there temporarily and see what it does. Alright, so I made it kind of a ghetto hold down bracket for this type of cable. I just had a flat piece of metal with a hole in it from something or other. And I just whacked it with my chisel over on the vise so that when it goes down on top of here, it won't squish the cable, and then it's also beveled like here, so it'll keep the cable from wanting to squish out whenever I tighten it down. So now let's mount that to the motor and see what happens. So of course, it's rubbing down there in that little divot. So I just need to kind of dog ear this a little bit over on the bench grinder so it'll fit in there. Alright, so I got it kind of dog-eared out some, and then I also took a hammer and kind of gave it a little love tap there to flatten it out so it'll give me a little bit of height clearance. Okay, so now that's good. So now let's grab our cable. Just kind of rough position it in. So this thing's already has like a bend in it from something or other, so way too long on here, so I'm going to need to cut my cable back some even to test it. So let's do that. Alright, so I got it mocked up now. So I got the cable here, going to our choke. I pull it. It pulls it open, but pushing it, the cable's just wanting to bend. It's not quite strong enough to move it back. So I don't know if that's just, it may just be because I have the wire here, so if I were to cut this wire back so that it had the metal pallet sheathing all around it a lot closer, that may help keep it from bending, but obviously it's not going to work like that right now, so keep playing with it. Alright, so it's adjusted now closer, and if I push it, it's not the prettiest, but the carburetor's moving a little bit as well, but it definitely works a lot better going both ways now. So that may be good enough for as little as I'm going to end up having to use the choke on this thing. But that's definitely a lot better doing it like that. So now I'm going to put the housing back on and see how it does. Alright, so kind of holding it in place. It's upside down right now. But as you can see now though, it moves it. It's not bad at all really. And I think once I move this put the little one of those little line clamps throttle cables used on it to keep it from pulling out. I think it'll work fine, but there's that direction and that way. So I think we'll be just fine now, but I have to disconnect it all anyway to route the handle in through the little hole up in the front. So it'll just be opposite. It'll be pushed in as choke on, and pulled out will be choke off. All right, so let's route the new cable through. So, and I'll probably have to take this back off again here in a minute when I do the throttle cable. But for now, let's just make sure it works in its permanent position. So I can put a loop, big loop in. Just kind of let the loop fall down over here. And it'll go right here, so. And then I'll zip tie that cable up where it doesn't rub on anything, and then it should be I'll have to hold the cable. Yep, that should work fine. It's tightened down, but I can't tighten it yet because I gotta take this back off. So, and I know that that's gonna work. I'm gonna leave it all loose and then do the throttle cable now. So I'm gonna take this back off. So we're gonna disconnect the throttle rod, and then in place of that, we'll use that's where we'll connect the other end of the throttle cable. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so here's the original throttle handle. Mounts in like this. And here's my new throttle cable. So I'm gonna get a bolt, but I need like one of those nylon lock washers to put on, or lock nuts to put on their side so I can still pivot some if it needs to keep the angle good. And of course, I don't have any, so that's another trip to the store. So what we'll do then is let's go ahead and connect it to this side, this end first. It shouldn't be a big deal at all. So let's do that. All right, so this bracket already came with a place to mount your throttle cable. Just gotta loosen this guy here, so this guy will come up some, and then put him under the edge, right there, and then we'll lock him into place. Okay, and then what we gotta do is loosen this guy. Of course, I'm gonna need a 10 mil, looks like. Yep, 5/16 doesn't fit. That's obviously because the throttle is going to go this way and that way. It's kind of tight right now. It's really tight. So let's see this nut right here. It's another 10 mil. It's kind of like a friction adjustment, and it's pretty tight, which makes sense because in a normal situation, you wouldn't want this to move real easy. So it's already moving. So there's full open. So it doesn't quite spring back all the way, so let's adjust a little bit more. That's all that thing right there is supposed to be for. And I may have to adjust the spring tension. If backing this off a little bit more, it doesn't do it. So there's full closed, wide open. So he's only springing back easily to there. So I think I'm just going to have to adjust the spring. That should be moving too. Oops, I can't see. Alright, that's what's supposed to be actually moving when I do that. But as you can see, it's not really. And that partly could be because of the fact the carburetor's loose. Let's try it again with it. Forgot the carburetor was loose. Oh, now it moves. Or it did. So I'm just going to have to play with this linkage a little bit because I want it to be fairly easy to move. Alright. This part here moves pretty easy, but I'll probably get it to move a tiny bit more. Probably going to move this thing that's going to be a real pain in the butt to get adjusted perfect because it doesn't have enough spring tension to pull back. And then when you go wide open, right there it's hitting the throttle stop. It's supposed to be factory adjusted on this thing. So you can't go super far. But obviously it's not. So anyway, let's just go ahead and attach our throttle cable temporarily. We're just going to pull some of the slack out, run it through here. Right now we are fully closed, so I'm just going to adjust it so that the eyelet I can see at the other end doesn't have any noticeable play on it. And obviously this will have to get fine-tuned once I can connect the other side, but we'll just kind of rough it in for right now. So now theoretically if I pull the cable, it does move it some, but it's being tight right there already. Not quite sure why. Anyway, so it's a matter of playing with this to get everything adjusted.